Welcome to r/entitled people, where we share stories from your lives about people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they should get what they want. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: a choosing beggar coworker and a micromanaging boss treat me like bat guano. After an interlude of despair, I discover a way to play their SH personalities against each other. The second story: about how savings over a product component led to huge losses for the company. The third story: I hated leaving like this, but I had enough. The first story is blocking the choosing beggar coworker with a micromanager. I am a software engineer by trade, not willing to be more specific than that, in fear of swift retribution from petty bureaucrats at the middle management. There are some genuinely good guys at my job. Sadly, they're a minority on the verge of extinction. I work mainly with SH larks. There is Boss Man the bigot, openly racist and proud of it. There is Brutus the backstabber, a back-talking human replicant who not only hides knives into other people's backs, but steals credits wherever he can. Also featuring Lord Varys, the master of unloading the burden of his great ideas onto unsuspecting workmates, rewarding them richly with blame when his grand plans inevitably go south. I'm pretty sure he's a eunuch too. With a host of lesser minions, they have turned the office into an SH show of the century. However, this story is not about them. Tonight's top billing: the micromanager, whom we shall refer to as Mark with a C, the constant pain in the A who henceforth is to be known as Francis C. Begbie. Begbie is the guy that worms his way past the defenses of formal issue tracking and schedules approved by our superiors. He slithers to your desk when the bosses aren't looking, dons his most pleasant semblance of a smile, and asks if you could implement just one small feature for him. I'm sure it won't take long. Could you do it just this once, please? When I started my job, I was a nice guy. I thought it's a decent thing to help your coworker when he's in need. I was young and eager, and so was our company. We had an SH ton of coding to do. Too few guys to do it. More often than not, I had too much on my plate already, but I still took some Begbie's requests on it, since I was a nice guy. Begbie was not. After implementing any kind of gadget or widget for him, I would invariably find him hissing at my cubicle, having shed his smile somewhere along the way. It's too complicated to use. Why is the output so messy? Why can't you make X so that it does Y instead of Z? Or something as charming. After a while, I started stalling with his requests, being still too nice to say outright no like I should have right from the start. I could have. He was my equal and should have no power over me. When I finally did say no, Begbie had gotten a taste of bossing me around. Begbie upped his ante. He started to carry his request to my nearest superior, Mark, which I guess would be the more correct way of doing things if done right. The superior reviews requests and assigns them to his underlings, taking care not to overburden his charges, keeping things balanced, equal, and nice. Everybody's happy. However, Begbie did it the Begbie way. Instead of participating in the bi-weekly workload planning sessions in which all the coders were supposed to be present, he started having quick one-on-one meetings with Mark, in which he hypnotized my boss with his mesmerizing CB gaze, or some other snarky SH. In the following bi-weekly session, the result transpired. Mark: OP, you got much to do? Me: well, yeah, I got the issues A, B, and C you just assigned to me in Project 1, and bugs D and E to fix in Project 2, plus the documentation for Client F. Mark: I heard from Begbie that he needs you to do Feature X. Can you do that? Me: actually, I don't think I have enough time to do even A, B, and C. Mark: Begbie said X should take a couple of hours at max. Me: from what I understand, it'll take more like 3 days to. Mark: okay, that's settled then. We will assign Feature X to OP. Meeting adjourned. Now, the excerpt above might sound like SH managering, but I assure you it was exactly that. For a first few months in this job, I assumed that this is a normal way for a manager to handle things. You see, I was fresh to the working world and naive, but as time passed, it was becoming more and more apparent that Mark took glee in lording over his subjects and stamping out their initiative, especially mine, as I didn't push back like Brutus the backstabber or guile my way out of unpleasant tasks like Lord Varys. My prophecy came true, and coding Begbie his beloved X took 3 days. 3 days I could have spent on fixing actual problems that, I don't know, clients actually paid for. This didn't stop my favorite coworker from complaining about the lack of usability, the lack of documentation, the lack of options, the lack of X not being Unix, GNU, and Google combined. These were addressed in the next bi-weekly. Every time I implemented something Begbie had asked for, he craved improvements and additions. For those improvements and additions, he craved more improvements and additions. I should commend my coworker, for he had invented the perpetual motion machine. I was starting to fall behind with my workload. But every time when I pretty justifiably opposed Begbie's specials in the bi-weeklies, Mark torpedoed my protests and served me on a silver plate whatever SH the slithering F-heap friend of his could muster. And he did it with that ever so slight smug grin on his face. So weeks passed and I toiled. By a miracle of undefined sorts, there came a day I had less work than usual on my backlog. I don't know if I felt like being a proactive company man, or if I just wanted to rob Mark the satisfaction of getting to dictate my actions for once. Hell, maybe I was just happy that I had dreamt of Lord Varys slipping on a banana peel and cracking his skull on the sidewalk or something. I can't remember, but anyway I had gotten yet another request from Begbie, and this time decided to fulfill it of my own volition. Come the bi-weekly. Mark, OP, you got much to do? Me, well, not that much right now, but I talked with Begbie and he asked me if I could implement this feature Z thing for him. I thought maybe I could do it next. Mark, yes, well, I would say it's better that we stick to the assigned schedule. Me, you mean? Mark, let's not pick any additional requests from outside the planned agenda. After all, we don't want to fall behind with the schedule. Meeting adjourned. I ambled back to my cubicle feeling kind of flabbergasted. I felt kind of angry too. That controlling C had once again vetoed my opinions just to veto my opinions. Until a light bulb lit above my head. Maintenance had finally fixed the lighting over my cubicle. I noticed. But I also noticed that I could play Mark's zeal for micromanaging against Begbie's passion for unending tasking. The next time Begbie needed something from me, I was sure to present the request to Mark, suggesting I could start working on it right away. Not surprisingly, Mark told me to wait until the bi-weekly meeting. In the meeting, I volunteered to start working on Begbie's latest ASAP. Net result, Mark explicitly forbade me from doing anything of sorts. I've been keeping this up for several weeks now. The system works beautifully. I keep shielding myself from Begbie with Mark's impenetrable wall of micromanaging. Whilst Mark thinks he's still getting one over me by denying my requests, Begbie's in a dead end. I've seen less and less of him in the last few days. I would love to say that he's come to realize what a D he was, but I don't believe in miracles anymore. However, I do think he's in the process of finding someone else to leech on, which puts a slight cautious smile on my lips every morning. The second story is how a tiny cost-saving experiment cost a company over 115,000 pounds of whiskey. So this happened a few years ago at a company which I didn't work at, but I worked next to. I spoke with the factory staff mostly during coffee breaks in the communal loading bay. The company manufactured various ceramics, from plates and mugs to more specialty orders like whiskey bottles and commemorative plaques. They had been in talks with a big whiskey company in Scotland for several months to manufacture 250,000 ceramic whiskey bottles over the next 5 years. I regularly chatted with the guys from the factory floor, and some of them had been in the ceramic industry since they'd left school, and what they didn't know about ceramics wasn't worth knowing. Anyway, after the whiskey company was satisfied that they could handle the volume of over 1,000 bottles a week, and their quality standards, the final hurdle came down to the price. I didn't know the exact numbers, but they ended up arguing over a few pence on each one. Eventually, the order came through and the first batch went into production, but the guys on the factory floor weren't happy. They explained to me that in order to make the slip, the ceramic liquid, cheaper, they were told to use less of one expensive ingredient and substitute it with something cheaper. The whiskey company was completely aware of this change, as this was all part of the cost-saving measure. The mold for the whiskey bottle was thickened to compensate for the slightly weaker ceramic slip. So the first 1,000 bottles were delivered to the customer successfully, and the bottling process began. Meanwhile, the ceramics factory ramped up production to around 1,200 a week in order to maintain an overstock to ensure they wouldn't incur a penalty should delivery deadlines be missed due to potential production or supply issues. Again, the factory staff weren't entirely happy with the product quality, but they were very pleased with the practically unlimited overtime they could pick up. About a month passes and I hear some awful news from one of the factory staff. The whiskey company completed their first bottling operation using the new ceramic bottles, but once they'd been filled up and moved around with a forklift truck, the bottoms were breaking open on practically every single one. Worse still, this was only discovered after all 1,000 had been filled with whiskey. Production of the bottles was immediately stopped, so that the cause of the problem could be determined. They even went as far as sending the bottles to be x-rayed to check their structural integrity. Eventually, it was discovered that even though the thickness of the ceramic had been increased, this wasn't enough to stop the bottom from falling out after it was filled with whiskey, and then moved with a forklift truck once it was boxed and palletized. So these were expensive bottles of whiskey, which would go on to retail for over 100 pounds a bottle, and practically all of the 1,000 bottles from the first bottling were now leaking their precious contents across the whiskey warehouse. The following week, 2 large skips, dumpsters, arrived at the ceramics factory and the staff were ordered to smash and dump every single one of the 2,500 whiskey bottles, which were still in the factory in various stages of production. Some were unglazed and straight out of the molds, and others were completed with glaze, artwork, and stickers. I went outside purely out of morbid curiosity to see pallet after pallet of empty whiskey bottles being taken outside, and each one smashed by hand with a hammer into the skip. I saw firsthand what had gone wrong with the bottles. The finished bottle looked flawless, but even the gentlest tap with a hammer and the whole bottom just fell out as if it were made of eggshell. I know that hitting a ceramic bottle with a hammer sounds like a harsh test, but these were thick, heavy ceramic bottles, which weighed about 2 pounds when they were empty, and yet the bottom of each one shattered like a thick eggshell. A few days later, production on the whiskey bottles started again using the original, slightly more expensive design. I was told that the product liability insurance claim was in the region of £115,000. Most of this was paid to the whiskey company for the lost whiskey, but some was being paid to the ceramics company for the raw cost of the lost materials they'd had to dump in the skip. The lesson here is to not be clever and try to save a few pennies on a vessel, which will hold 100 pounds worth of whiskey. And the last story is quitting and walked out. I, 30 female, handed in my resignation from my manager job I worked for almost 8 years, as I was done being the one who really cared about the park, from making sure it's clean to ensuring the staff were in their uniforms. I gave them 3 weeks to find someone to replace me instead of the contracted 2 weeks. After emailing my resignation, I just didn't care once I got a reply from my area manager, telling me they were sad but understand. Moving to 7 days after my resignation, there was a situation where I allowed an ex-staff in the break room while they were waiting for their friends, and they ended up taking a shot of whatever alcohol they brought. They were all of legal age. I'll admit I was in the room as well, but I didn't stay or say anything, and walked out because I honestly did not care. And these staff were off shift and out of uniform. During this day as well, I also emailed HR asking if it was possible to move my resignation from 3 weeks to 2 weeks instead, as I was honestly done with this job and wanted to be out of there as soon as possible. I was over this job affecting my mental health. We were also dealing with a toilet that was backing up into 2 bathrooms, which the morning team ended up just closing the bathrooms and not cleaning them, and a fountain that flooding. Knowing that they would leave the biohazardous water on the floors and not clean it, I decided to take the time to clean up the nasty water, as I did not want that festering overnight, or leaving it for the morning team and manager. I did want to call an emergency plumber, but there are a bunch of hoops I would have to do to get approval for this expense. I asked my manager to call me at their earliest convenience, because this was the plan I wanted to go, but when I got no response after an hour, I messaged him back, and told him to never mind about calling me, irritated that I got no support. However, when my supervisor emailed about the toilet leaking in the back, they got responses right away from the area manager and other manager. But when I realized what the actual problem was, and sent an email saying that one of the toilets is backing up the pipes and coming out of the floor drains, I got silence and no response. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I got back to cleaning the affected bathrooms. I checked my phone 10 minutes where I had missed a call, and a message from them asking me to call them. Well, apparently word got out to another manager while I was cleaning the nasty water, who asked me to call them asking about the earlier situation. So once I got all the water soaked up so that the team would just have to clean the bathrooms regularly, I walked into the office and gave them a call, in which I told them yes, I allowed the ex-employee in the break room as I did not want them waiting in the building out in the open with drinks, and then went on to explain that I was tired of coming to work in a dirty building, with 4 supervisors who did not care. I ended up telling him I was done with being the one who notices these things, that I was leaving, and hung up. I messaged my area manager that I quit, put my keys in a baggie, and walked out. There was still a capable supervisor to lock up and close, along with a new training manager. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have a good day.